Welcome to the 2025 Summer Heat Series on Demand, brought to you by the Industrial Athletic Trainers Society Continuing Education Program. Following the video, check the video description for more information about how members can collect their CEU for this video. Let's get started.
Today, we'll go ahead and get started. To introduce to you Dr. Awalsi. He is an associate professor and division leader of construction science and management in the School of Civil and Environmental Engineering and Construction Management at the University of Texas at San Antonio. He's also a Lutcher Brown Endowed Fellow and the Director of Safety Innovation and Sustainable Infrastructure, the SI Squared Lab at UTSA. He holds his PhD and his MS in Civil Engineering from the University of Alabama, and an MS in Construction Management with distinction, and a BS in Building from the University of Lagos. Prior to joining academia, he worked with construction industry for several years, where he managed the construction of various buildings and infrastructure projects. And with his research conducted with areas of construction safety, health, automation, robotics, innovation, technology, and much, much more. So we are greatly honored to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us, and I will go ahead and turn it over to you. And then, sorry, real quick, I will monitor the chat box for you. If folks have questions, I'll let you kind of see if you want to announce those throughout, or I'll monitor the chat box for you if you need anything.
All right. Thank you so very much, Dr. Chapman. A very good morning to you all from here, from Texas, San Antonio, Texas.
I think I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, let's see. Speaker. Let me check if my audio is fine. Can you hear me now? Hello, can you hear me? Hello? Oh, okay. So, all right, let's see. Hold space to talk. All right, can you hear me now? All right. So I guess everyone else can hear. Okay, beautiful. All right. Thank you for that nice introduction. My name is Ibukun Awolisi. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for joining. Um, I'm going to be talking about a topic I'm very excited about. I mean, it's something I kind of enjoy talking about. But before I proceed, I would like to state that I have no disclosures with respect to this presentation and things you're going to be seeing on the slide. So, well, let me just jump straight into this presentation. The title is Blazing Equation Solving Heat Safety Challenges. And I'd like to acknowledge the host of this presentation, for a job well done. Dr. Mike Chapman and Suzanne, thanks for putting this great webinar together. So these are the learning objectives of this session. So we'll be able to discuss the risk factors of heat-related illnesses in industrial work environments. But also, at the end of this presentation, we'll develop a good understanding of heat-related illnesses, the causes of these illnesses, and then the ways we can prevent. Because, of course, the key is prevention, right? We need to be proactive in our approach to managing safety and health. And more importantly, when it comes to heat-related illnesses, it's very, very important for us to be very proactive. So I'm going to be talking about some of the preventive measures that can be taken to prevent the illnesses. And then we'll describe the practical strategies for risk reduction and prevention of heat-related illnesses. And lastly, we'll also discuss the use of cutting-edge physiological monitoring, approaches for preventing heat-related illnesses in industrial work environments. So first and foremost, I wanted to show this chart. So it's from uh, the weather app. So uh, it shows weather fatalities in 2024. As you can see on the screen, um, we have different types of weather-related events that occur every year. For instance, in the United States and of course in different parts of the world. And we know how deadly some of these weather-related events are. Talking about hurricane, tornadoes, and so on. I mean, I lived in Tuscaloosa, Alabama for close to 4 years, and it's an area that is prone to tornadoes. Before I moved there, I mean, there was one particular tornado that happened in 2011. So it's really very deadly. And, I know how deadly such weather-related event is. Hurricane, we know the impact of hurricane, on communities, families, and the rest. But the fact is, um, as you can see on the screen, it has been responsible for the highest number of deaths when it comes to weather related events. I mean, for a few decades now, right? As a matter of fact, within the last 40 years, extreme levels of heat stress, as it's been very high. It has doubled over the last 4 decades. So because of that, it's very very important for us to take um, a prevention of heat-related illnesses, or how we can actually identify, what the risk factors are, protect our workers when they're working in industrial environment. It's very important for us to take it very seriously. And of course, we have seen, the pattern of the climate. It seems, the trend is just going to continue, right? So, I mean, global warming and so on and so forth. So it's very, very important for us to take this um, case very seriously. More importantly, when we have workers working outdoors, right? And of course, indoor workers are not, exempt, from this situation. So it's very important for us to kind of take um, its stress prevention very seriously. So what is heat stress, right? Heat stress is can be, said to be a series of conditions where the body is under stress from, overeating, right? It's has to do with how, um, you know, workers is the net load of to which a worker is exposed from the combined conditions, of metabolic heat, institution where when workers are working, right, they develop metabolic heat. That's the kind of heat being generated based on the metabolic activities, happening, right? It's internal heat being generated, and when that is combined with environmental factors, we're talking about hot work environment, then it becomes very serious, right? And then again, of course, we wear clothing, right, when we're walking. So when we combine these three factors, then workers become susceptible to heat stress. Can develop heat-related illnesses, and and this can result in increase of heat, storage in the body. So that's how heat stress is kind of generated. So it's very important for us to be able to manage this condition, right? And I would like to transition to a discourse on the physiology of heat stress. So how is it really formed, right? So it's of course from factors in the environment, and of course physical activities can increase um, the core temperature, right, of the body, right, and they can lead to physiological responses, all right, from the body as the body attempts to kind of prevent heat stress or heat related illnesses through thermal regulation. So when the body is trying to respond, right, to the environmental factors and also the impact of metabolic heat being generated from physical activities, then the response kind of increases in an attempt to kind of regulate the body. As you can see on the screen, you have a station where the environment is warm or hot. The core body temperature, the organs of the body. I'm going to talk more about what the core organs of the body, what they kind of entail. So they tend to respond, all right, to the changes in the environment, and of course the activities going on within the body. That's the physical activity. So, and as you can see here, the core body temperature is very, very critical. So it has to do with the temperature of the internal organs of the body. That's the deep tissues of the body. So it's not like the skin temperature, right, which is peripheral in nature, right? So it's about how or what the internal organs of the body are getting, So it's very, very critical in predicting, how the body will respond or what the body is going to feel when it comes to, response to heat or impact of outwork environments on the body. So it's very, very important for us to be mindful of, the core body temperature. I'm going to talk about other parameters that's actually help to, give an indication of, if someone would suffer from heat stress. So, but this kind of shows or explains um, how the body kind of regulates, the system, the organs of the system, how the body maintains, thermoregulation. So again, thermoregulation has to do with, how the body is able to maintain, a very good state, to ensure that one is not stressed, as a result of outwork environment. Right. So I would like to briefly talk about the importance of acclimatization. I know Suzanne yesterday talked a lot about acclimatization in a presentation. So acclimatization is very, very critical, right? I mean, you don't just throw a walker into the or throw someone, all right, into the deep end of water, right? You want to make sure they start from the shallow part and then gradually you know, get accustomed, to the work environment. I mean, you don't want to bring someone from, a cold region, maybe northeast, and then you just bring them to Texas, South Texas, San Antonio, for instance, and then of course you make them work the full eight-hour shifts without giving them the opportunity to acclimate or have the body get accustomed to the work environment, the nature of the work, the fact that metabolic heat is being generated, in addition to the work environment, which is usually off out here in Texas. So acclimation helps the body. All right, it helps to reduce the risk of dehydration. All right, when the environment is very hot, what happens is through thermoregulation, the body produces sweat, all right? But acclimation or acclimatization helps to reduce the rate at which, dehydration occurs. And then it helps to reduce the loss of salt, essential um, minerals from the body. So, of course, we know sweating and evaporation they cause cooling, right? So, and that becomes more efficient when the worker is acclimated, to the work environment. And salt loss, becomes more efficient. Okay, it's much reduced. And then Core body temperature is also maintained more efficiently, you know, when a worker is acclimated to the work environment, and it helps to reduce the strain on the heart, right? So when you're talking about heart rate, when a worker is working in a hot work environment, um, heart rate increases, right? So, but when that worker is acclimated to the work environment, what happens is that blood circulation to the skin becomes more efficient, right? It helps to kind of stabilize the heart rate. And then, of course, recovery, or heart rate recovery is much more improved. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, when it comes to how we can manage each stress or prevent each stress. So, talking further about acclimatization. So the human body needs um, to acclimate to a hot work environment in about 10 to 14 days. We need about 10 to 14, so more than a week, right? So it's a process in which the worker is gradually exposed, right, to the hot work environment. Okay, so you allow the worker to work less and take more rest, or probably, as opposed to having the worker work outdoors for the most part of the shift. You may have the worker work, maybe indoors, just to kind of limit the exposure, to the outwork environment. So it's very, very critical to be mindful of that. The timing is very, very important, right? So again, it should be more than 7 days. So we're looking at 10 to 14 days. And then again, you want to make sure you avoid prolonged exertion during the hottest working day. So one way you can do that is, you can try to schedule every work task, um, you know, during the cooler part of the day, when the sun is not hot, or probably in the evening, right? Depending on how you want to manage the schedule, right? And then also, when a worker is acclimated to a working condition and then takes a break or maybe travels, right? Maybe summer break or something. Then when this worker comes back, there is need for reacclimatization of the worker. So it's very important. You don't just come and just get back to your full shift. No, you want to take your time to reacclimate. So when it comes to reacclimatization, about 2 to 3 days are required, for worker to reacclimate, to the work environment, so there won't be a problem. All right, so I'd like to also talk briefly about, the population that is at risk of age-related illnesses, right? So of course we're talking about athletes, right? I mean, because of the physical exertion, right? In addition to working or training in hot environment, the physical exertion, which is very high, leads to the production of metabolic heat. So they're at risk. The first responders, right? Environment, and the fact that the firefighters and the rest, they're exposed to heat, so they're at risk. Then construction workers, those in the military, um, and workers in oil and gas. So these are, workers in agriculture, in manufacturing environments. Those are working warehouses. So these are workers that are, exposed or to heat related illnesses. They are at risk. So it's very, very important for us to be able to manage, the important metrics, right? Parameters, that can be used to predict, right, and prevent heat-related illnesses. Talking about the core body temperature, heart rate, and some other, factors. Right. So I'd like to talk briefly about the risk factors of heat-related illnesses. This is a chart from the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. So it has the different risk factors. So it's very, very important for us to be mindful of the risk factors. So if you're talking about prevention, it's very critical for us to review the risk factors. So As you can see, there are different categories of risk factors. Of course, the first one is the environmental risk factors. I know yesterday's presenter talked about this, so I mean, I don't want to bore us, talking about them in details again, but it's very important to really highlight how important it is for us to understand these risk factors. I know yesterday the categories that the presenter talked about were external and internal, but I'm going to categorize them into three. As you can see, we have the environmental factors, of course, which are very critical. The temperature, humidity, uh, air movements, and the radiant heat. I mean, there are temperature, threshold that you want to, be mindful of, right? When you need to access for heat hazard, right? I mean, there are studies that have been conducted. I mean, currently we have an active training funded by the Susan Howard Safety Training Grant. So where we train construction workers on heat stress prevention. Of course, we um, talk to them about the temperatures they should look out for when it comes to assessing for heat-related illnesses. But again, it's not just about the temperature alone, right? Of course, you want to consider the effect of the humidity, right? That's the amount of um, water vapor in the atmosphere is very, very critical. So humidity level can actually increase what you're getting in terms of, outwork environments. Um, and then the air movement is also very critical, right? I mean, if the environment is very hot, humidity is high, and the speed of air is very high, and it's moving that outward towards you. So there's tendency for you to, get more when it comes to, high heat load, right? And then of course, the environment where workers are working, radiant heat, are the workers working near a boiler, right, or near a furnace, things like that. So the radiant heat sources, can actually increase environmental risk factors. And then when we go to the work-related factors, we're talking about the fact that the work that and the tasks that workers perform, in their various work environments, physically exerting. So physical exertion, of course, as I've said previously, increases the metabolic heat being produced, right? And then, of course, the clothing, right? The layers of clothing also play a critical role, right? And at times, because of the fact that we need to protect ourselves, workers may have to work in full body suit, right? If you're working in an area where you need to protect yourself from chemical, right? So you may have to have, full body suit, so that also further increases the risk, right, of each related illnesses. And then, of course, we'll talk about the personal risk factors. Age is a critical factor. How physically fit the worker is. Again, I've talked about acclimatization, very important. And then some pre-existing, occurring medical conditions that may impact, right, the body physiology, and then the medications that the worker is taking at a given point in time, and alcohol use and intake of caffeine can also, be major risk factors, right? For instance, alcohol causes dehydration. Intake of caffeine also causes dehydration. So these are risk factors that we have to, really be mindful of. We need to collect data of information of these risk factors so we can effectively prevent heat-related illnesses in workers. All right, so I'd like to talk about those heat-related illnesses that, of course, we want to prevent, that we don't want. As you can see, of course, we have about five of them that I'm going to talk about briefly. So, from the least severe to the most severe, all right, the one that gives discomfort to the very deadly one, right? The least severe, as you can see on the screen, is the heat rash, right? And then, of course, the most severe, which could be deadly, right, could lead to death, is the heat stroke, right? So, first and foremost, I'd like to start from the left, of course, and I'll be talking about what the symptoms are like, right? The signs and symptoms of each rash, the causes, and then more importantly, how we can prevent them. So again, the idea is to prevent, all right, and not to try to want to start correcting. So we want to make sure we're preventing them from occurring. And there are things that we can proactively do to prevent heat stress from occurring. So as you can see, each rash has to do with itchy and painful clusters of red blisters around the neck, right? The chest or the groin area, the armpit, the creases of the knees or elbows. They caused by irritation of the skin due to excessive sweating. So again, the body responds to it by sweating, all right, producing sweat, right, water and salt, right. But when sweating becomes elevated too high, it can actually irritate the skin if the sweat is not properly managed, right? Sweating causes cooling, right? But if it's retained, it can actually irritate the skin and can cause heat rash, which is not comfortable in any respect. So how do we prevent um, that condition, all right? What are the preventive measures that we can take? So, I mean, we want to make sure we wear loose fitting clothing, all right, that allows um, the sweat to dissipate. Breathable clothing can also help allow um, the sweat to dissipate easily. Make sure every day you use freshly laundered, clothing. Workers when they work on site, when they go the first day, in the workplace. I mean, due to it, they get dirty. You can say, "Oh, let me just use the same." All right, the following day, no, don't do that. That can irritate the skin and cause heat rash. So it's very important for us to be mindful of that. Avoid working in sweat-soaked clothing for a long period of time, and then we can, wash sweat-soaked areas of the body, with clean water and soap, mild soap, and then we dry it thoroughly. So those are preventive measures that we can take. So the next heat-related illness I'll talk about is the heat cramp, because so that has to do with spasm, muscle cramp, pains in the muscle, on the leg, back muscle, abdominal muscle, torso, the body, basically. So they're caused by depletion or loss of salt and water in the body due to excessive or elevated sweating. And how do we prevent such condition, right? So what we want to do is to get the worker acclimated, to the work environment, the type of work and the work environment, right? I've discussed that previously. And then you want to drink adequate amount of water throughout the day. So when we talk about adequate amount of water, right, it's something that is gradual, not, taking um, a full, 1 gallon of water at once, right? Because you're sweating profusely and then it gets all of the water into the system once. No, it's not that way, because in fact the water is lost gradually. The fluid is being lost gradually through sweat. So you want to make sure you gradually, take the water and not, just once, because when you take water once, when you take a large amount of water once, it can actually distort the functioning of the body system. So we want to make sure you avoid that. So again, when it comes to replacing the salts or minerals that have been lost, what you want to do is to just simply salt your food to taste, right? Avoid salt tablets. I know in some establishments they use that, but we should try to avoid that, because it could get to a point where we find it difficult to control the salt intake when we're using the tablets, right? And of course, too much salt can lead to high blood pressure and some other illnesses that of course we don't want to expose ourselves to. All right, then I'll talk about heat syncope. That has to do with the feeling of lightheadedness, dizziness, see if someone is going to faint when maybe a walker is standing for too long, or an athlete is standing for too long, right? Or maybe in resting or supine position and suddenly, a stand. So we want to make sure that we're very careful, right? When we're standing, okay, we have to walk for long. You can break that up, right? Try to, sit, right? And then when you're in a supine or resting position, don't just stand suddenly. Okay, you want to make sure it's gradual, right? So you don't just, experience it syncoping, right? And I'd like to talk about heat exhaustion, right? Again, so the first three I've talked about, so there are conditions that can actually be managed in the work environment through first aid, but when you transition to heat exhaustion, I mean, you have to take that very seriously. It's something we should avoid, right? It's more like a 911 case, right? So it's a situation where the core body temperature has elevated, to above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 100.4 to 102.2. So it's something we want to make sure we avoid. Oral temperature could be around 99.6, to 101. But again, that's if further emphasizes, all right, the importance of, you know, the core body temperature as opposed to oral body temperature now, right? And then you notice that the worker is unable, the body is unable to cool itself, right? So that's a sign of heat exhaustion. And of course, it could be due to a combination of, several factors, high temperature, high humidity, and so on and so forth. So how do you prevent that? So the way to prevent that is to get the worker acclimated to the condition, drink adequate amount of water, make sure you have the rest breaks, very, very important in a shaded area, and then protect the skin from sunburn, because a damaged skin, all right, can, reduce the ability of the skin or the body to cool itself. So we want to make sure you were very mindful of that. Perform heavier physical work during the cooler part of the day. And then the last is heat stroke. This is very deadly. So you can see the core body temperature is elevated. I mean, you're looking at 104 degree Fahrenheit. That's very high, right? In fact, the body is unable to cool itself, and then again, caused by, some of the factors we've talked about. High temperature, high humidity. We're talking about the air velocity. Maybe, I mean, there's no a free movement of air, and so on and so forth. Work is working near radiant heat sources. So these are factors that can actually contribute. So it's very, very important to take um, an aggressive measure to kind of stabilize the worker's condition, bring the condition back to normalcy. So again, you want to make sure you acclimate the workers, and then drink adequate amount of water throughout the day to prevent that, right? And take a small rest. I'll talk about recommendations, for resting in terms of number of a minute you want to rest in an hour, for instance. We want to protect the skin from sunburn. And then in terms of scheduling of work, cooler work, heavier works can be performed in the cooler part of the day, as opposed to just throwing the workers out there, in the sun. So I want to talk briefly about the proposed rule by OSHA, right? So we have the notice of proposed rulemaking, all right, by OSHA. So, I mean, it's a document, it's a very lengthy document that has a lot of information, but this chart actually gives a summary of the important elements that we need to be mindful of. So again, it's very, very important to be able to identify the hazards. We've talked about the risk factors. So we want to be mindful of what the risk factors are, right? And also prepare for emergency, right? I mean, I didn't talk about that, but I mean that's part of the things that we want to put in place on in the workplace. You know, the first aid kit should be there, right? And then the information about the closest medical facility, you know, the route and all those stuff. It's very very important, right? Emergency response. So that could be the difference between, you know, life and death. So it's very critical for us to put that in place, and we cannot overemphasize the importance of training, you know, for both supervisors and employee. I mean, these are elements of stress prevention program that, you know, we need to make sure we have in our plan. So we each entity, all right, should be able to develop its injury and illness prevention plan, right? And it has to be specific to the site. So it's not like a company-wide stuff. Yeah, of course, you could have company-wide, you know, details, content, but more importantly, you want to make sure it's specific to the work environment, right? Because of course, each work environment has its uniqueness. So we need to be mindful of that, and it's very important for us to keep record. You want to make sure you track the record to be able to train and make informed decision on, you know, the best way to kind of protect the workers. Again, there are recommendations on, you know, water intake, right? It's very very critical. You're talking about 8 ounces, you know, maybe 8 ounces every 15 minutes, right? Again, it's going to be gradual. You're not just getting 1 full gallon in, right? Because you've lost a lot of sweat. All right. So and then work rest schedule, very critical, right? Injecting break into the work activity, you know, throughout the day. I'll talk about the recommendations. So uh, OSHA uh, recommended made a recommendation on um, you know, mandatory rest break, right? 15 minutes, okay, every 2 hours. So we're talking about 7.5 minutes every 1 hour. Okay, so that's the recommendation. It's a mandatory thing in the proposed rule. So it's something we need to be mindful of. So how do you implement control even in indoor work environment? So it's not just about outdoor environment. So indoor work environment can be very hot. And then of course I've talked about acclimation or acclimatization. And then it's important to be able to communicate, you know, some of these things, of course, is tied to training as well. And then, you know, the body system is very critical. All right. So, I mean, that helps to determine the signs. All right. So there are signs and there are symptoms. Okay. So there are signs. Signs are things that maybe people see in you, right? Then symptoms are things that we feel ourselves. So training helps us to know what you know, symptoms are talking about, you know, susceptibility to heat related illnesses. Okay, and then of course the body system can help, you know, to identify signs when someone um, is suffering from heat stress, you know, while at work. And then it's important to provide the right alerts. Okay, hazard alert system is very very critical. So as you can see, so there is the initial heat trigger, and there is the I it trigger. Okay, so there's distinction between them. So when it's about, you know, based on OSHA's recommendation, when the heat index is 80 degrees Fahrenheit, so that's the initial. So you want to start taking those measures, and then there are things that you have to take, of course, mandatory measures that you have to take when there's um, each trigger, right? So we're talking about, you know, when, for instance, each index is elevated to about 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's OSHA's recommendation. So, all right, I just wanted to highlight, you know, the hierarchy of controls that we have. The most common one, of course, we know engineering is the most effective, right? So it's about reducing the stress, you know, risk factors. Of course, I mean, there are different ways work can be performed in our work environment. So you can leverage the use of um, um, equipment rather than, you know, doing it manually. So when you use equipment, for instance, it helps to decrease the metabolic heat being produced. We can work towards reducing the WBGT, uh, and then of course talk about using tools or equipment rather than, you know, the physical, you know, modes of traditional method, manual methods. And then, of course, there are different administrative strategies that could be put in place, acclimating workers to the work environment and to the work itself, adjusting work rest schedule, right? Injecting the breaks in, shaded areas, resting, water intake, encouraging water intake or hydration, and then, of course, training in those administrative control strategies. And then, of course, the clothing and PPE equipment used. So again, we can adjust the work layers. If you don't need multiple layers, you don't have to use that, right? And also, the color of our clothing plays critical role, right? I mean, light colored clothing are reflective in nature. So we can use clothing that have light color as opposed to dark color clothing. And then, of course, you can use more other, you can leverage other, imagine technology systems, cooling vests, cooling clothing. They also kind of help. All right. So let me move to prevention. Proper now, I want to talk about some of the ways we can proactively or actively prevent age-related illnesses. So I mean, it's about monitoring. All right, monitoring, tracking. Again, we want to be proactive this time around. We want to monitor the risk factors. Environmental monitoring. Monitoring work conditions, and also monitoring the physiology of the workers. Personal monitoring, personalized monitoring are very, very important. So when it comes to monitoring weather, of course, I've talked about, the air temperature, very critical, humidity level, the speed of the wind or velocity of the wind, the pressure, and of course, location also matters, right? I mean, you want to know the location, right, of the job site, what's happening there, what's the temperature like, what are these, conditions like. And then, of course, the nature of the work, right? There are work that are physically exerting, right? And there are work that are less, right? So you want to understand the type of work that is being, performed at a point in time, because the higher the physical exertion, the higher the metabolic heat that will be produced. And of course, again, I've talked about the importance of clothing, the type, even the material of the clothing. Is it breathable? So all those, they kind of play a critical role. How many layers? You have to have full body suit, you have vapor barrier, things like that. So those are things that we need to be mindful of. And then we talk about the physiological monitoring, of course, which plays critical role. We need to be able to know how we're responding, okay, to the heat load, all right, the environmental factors, and of course, effect of work conditions, right? So the body temperature, okay, we're talking about the core body temperature, the heart rate, how are we recovering from elevated heart rate due to environmental or thermal heat around us, and the metabolic heat being produced. So how are we recovering? How are we able to stabilize the heart rate? Okay, monitoring dehydration, body weight, how much water are we losing, right? And then, of course, you can easily see how dehydrated we are in the uric column, for instance. So I've talked about a little bit about heat index. I mean, the question could be, why not just use heat index, right? I mean, heat index is good, gives us an indication of what's happening, the level of hazard, but it's not enough to completely assess the risk, right? The level of risk, right? Of course, heat index has to do with it considers just the temperature and humidity, right? Of course, we know if humidity is very high, when humidity goes beyond 50%, then, right, when you combine that with maybe a temperature, air temperature of 70, for instance, or let's say 80 in this case, right? When the heat index is 50, you can imagine it increases that, right? When the temperature is, let's say, 98 in Texas, that's a normal thing. I mean, during the summer months, we see that very frequently, right? Temperature of 98, and then with humidity of 65, which is also common in Texas. I mean, you're looking at 128, that can, fry a chicken, right? So it's very, very important for us to be mindful of this. But at the same time, heat index is not enough, all right, because it doesn't consider other factors that can actually determine what exactly we're getting, right? I mean, if you're using just heat index 128, then no one should work, right? But of course, you see workers still working, all right? In Texas, where the temperature is 98 and humidity is 65. So because of that, it's very important for us to, consider other factors, the cloud cover, the wind speed. If the wind speed is high, for instance, it could help reduce, the heat load or the effects we're getting on the body. So that's why it's very important for us to consider all this. So as opposed to, just using heat index, it's important for us to use the WBGT, the wet bulb globe temperature. So as you can see, it considers, all the other factors that can actually impact, um, what worker, all right, or what an athlete is kind of getting, when it comes to the effect of heat. So we have there are different, types of equipment that can be used, and as you can see, picture, but they are, mobile ones that can easily be moved around, right? And then of course we have the common one, and of course this equation kind of tells us how the WBGT is determined. So it considers, different, temperatures, on the shade, and so on the dry bulb temperature, the globe thermometer temperature, and then the natural weight bulb temperature. It kind of finds, the average, based on, these weights, right? And then when it comes to physiological monitoring, right? I mean, traditionally, oral temperature, has been used, because you can easily get a thermometer, right? Non-reusable one, of course, right? When you put it in the mouth of the worker, right? So you get a temperature. There are recommendations not to have it, exceed 99.5, and then you have to adjust work rest schedule when it's beyond 99.1. But the question is, how effective or accurate is the oral temperature, right? I mean, you're working in a hot work environment, you have to be mindful of how you store the thermometer itself, right? If the thermometer is not appropriately stored, if it's stored in a condition where the temperature is very high, you want to use the thermometer, you have it in your truck, right? And it's 95-degree Fahrenheit. So obviously the thermometer is not going to be, effective. It's not really going to give you what you need at a given point in time. So we need something um, that is much more, continuous, much more accurate. All right. So again, the question is, how effective is the oral temperature? I don't know how many. I mean, there might be a few work environment, construction sites, they use oral thermometer, but how effective will it be when it comes to the kind of conditions that we find ourselves in our work environment? So with respect to heart rate, right? When heart rate goes beyond 110, then a worker should take a break, right? So historically, traditionally, one can use try to measure the pulse, looking at the wrist, right? But again, I don't think I've ever been able to do that correctly. So, and I don't think, that would be very effective in the outwork environment, right? I mean, when workers are working, I don't think, it would be easy to correctly get that, to be able to make the decision you need to make to protect workers from heat-related illnesses, right? I mean, as you can see, I've talked about the fact that, um, when the worker starts resting, okay, if for instance the heart rate increases, beyond 110 beat per minute, you want to, start the rest, and after 2 minutes, you want to make sure that the heart rate has gone down by not less than 10 beats per minute, right? So if, for instance, after 2 minutes, the heart rate has not gone down by more than 10 beat per minute, then that worker is not recovering appropriately. So that worker shouldn't go back to work. That worker should continue to rest. And you want to check it in the next 2 minutes. So if it's not going down as it should, that means either that particular work is not appropriate for the worker, right? That means you have to probably change, or the environment is not okay. So that's the way, we kind of consider or make use of the heart rate recovery, right? And of course, the traditional method, will not be as effective as, some of the emerging methods that can be used, which I'm going to be talking about in the next few slides. All right. So that will take us to, some, more real-time, continuous and more accurate and automated monitoring of some of these stress risk factors. As I've said, traditional methods, you're processing them after the fact, um, it might be intrusive, just think about, using oral thermometer, right? They also lack real-time monitoring capabilities, right? So, but we can actually leverage emerging wearable devices that offer continuous monitoring, continuous measurements, real-time data. You can also analyze in real time, right? And of course, there are different types of sensors that are used in these wearable devices, and they can help to gather data. They can analyze the data, right, in real time. Do some cloud computation, and then give you the results, so you can proactively, all right, use what you're getting to kind of adjust your work, activities to prevent yourself from stress. They exist in different forms, wristbands, smart vests, smart helmets, and so on and so forth. So, and the application, of course, depends on what you want to track, right? The nature of your work, right? The type of work, and there are different types of sensors that can be used. Right. So we did a study where we looked at off-the-shelf wearable devices that can be used for heat stress prevention. We have a good number of them, as you can see on the screen. There is the device type. Some are more portable than the others. Some are handband, wristband. Some are embedded, in the chest area. Some are put around the chest, and they have different, capabilities in terms of the types of monitoring they perform, the types of metrics or parameters they measure. And of course, we have the highlights of how they actually perform. I wouldn't want to bore us with, details about that. You can make reference to that after the presentation, right? And then these are pictures, right, of some of those devices that we have. We have a Sleep Safety Band V2. We have the Fire harness, core sensor, tag, and so on and so forth. So these are examples of, commercially available wearable sensing devices that are being used across different industrial sectors to continuously monitor, risk factors, some of the metrics that can be used to predict and, in fact, prevent age-related illnesses in workers. So the other question that comes to mind is, how accurate will these devices be, when it comes to actually tracking? So a few studies have actually been conducted to kind of check the accuracy of some of these wearable sensing devices that can be used to monitor heat stress metrics. So as you can see, there was one conducted by a colleague of mine at the University of Alabama. So it was done in a lab environment, of course, not maybe a work environment, but of course, the lab environment simulated, working typical work environment, in a chamber where, the temperature can be increased to the desired level, all right, to the level where, of course, we want to be able to measure the effect or the heat load on worker. And as you can see, we have workers performing critical activity, dumbbell curling task, right? So to kind of generate the metabolic heat. So the wearable sensing devices that were compared were the Slate Safety, Band V2, all right, and then Band V1 actually then, right, the core sensor, the Zephyr Bio harness, and then The control was more like the core temperature ingestible sensor, right? Ingestible sensor, of course. Because it's going into the body, is ingested by the worker, right? It's going into the body. It can actually measure the core body temperature correctly. There have been studies, that have demonstrated, the accuracy, of the ingestible sensor. But again, how many of those ingestible sensors can we actually use in our work environment? I know workers may have concerns when it comes to ingesting, such to kind of measure the temperature. It's kind of invasive. So that's why it's very important for us to look at, the wearable devices that can actually be used for this purpose as opposed to that. But this particular ingestible sensor was used as a control to kind of check the wearable devices, how close they could be in terms of accuracy, right? So as you can see on the screen, so the slate safety, with bias of zero point 0.2, precision of 0.3, 95% limit of agreement. So you can see the accuracy was very close, right? Precision was less than plus or minus zero point 0.5 degrees Fahrenheit, and um, less than plus or minus 1 degrees Fahrenheit. So the result was really good. So which means that when we deploy, some of these wearable devices, like the slave safety wearable devices, which I've also used in my lab in one of my experiments, we can be sure of getting good results. So I would like to talk briefly about a few case studies that we reviewed. All right, slate safety band V2, of course, I used it in on my research last summer. So we wanted to test the impact of heat stress prevention interventions, right, on construction workers. So here in Texas, so we had 8 workers that we divided into um, 2 groups. We had a test group and then we have a control group, right? So the test group, of course, implemented interventions, right? Okay, some of the interventions we looked at were, work rest schedule, workers taking break of 6 or 9 minutes every hour. And then we implemented hydration protocol in which we made workers in the test group to take 16 ounces of water, all right, every 1 hour, or maybe a little more frequent, right? 8 ounces every 30 minutes, okay, to kind of check the effects, right? And then, of course, we add the control group that perform normal activities, normal measures, being taken in the work environment, right? And of course, we add a cooling method where workers are rested in, shaded area with air conditioning system, and then without air conditioning system to kind of check the intervention. So core body temperature reduced, all right, by 0.693 degrees Fahrenheit, right, for the test group, right, that's implemented intervention as opposed to, the control group. And then heart rate also reduced. You can imagine that was really, very high. Okay, and then of course we're able to identify the most effective intervention. All right, 6 minutes rest was good as opposed to 9 minutes longer break. 8 ounces every 30 minutes, which means more frequent. It's good, and of course, expectedly, resting in a shaded area with the air conditioning system was also very effective. So another case study that I would like to talk about is the case study of nurses performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation, right? Completed activities, 20 minutes in 2 conditions, temperature set at 71 degrees Fahrenheit and 85. So participants in the hot workroom wore splash resistant gown, to replicate real life conditions. So there was high correlation, right, between the slate safety and of course the other system that was used for heart rates. and then the ingestible pill, similar to the study we conducted in the lab, right? And of course, you can see the main difference. So, which this was basically to confirm the effectiveness of a wearable sensing device, that's its safety, band V2. And then, of course, the Zephyr bioharness was also used on military workers, right? Air Force trainees, about more than 1,000 workers trained, in 2021. Rectal temperature was used to confirm, its exertion, right? Again, this was pretty much to kind of test the effectiveness of the wearable device. And of course, you can see the core body temperature from the device has poor sensitivity and poor negative prediction value based on, the study findings, right? And of course, I know some of these vendors or manufacturers of these devices, of course, they um, use these types of results to kind of improve their system, subsequently, and then the later version being reduced, of course, they expected to become more effective. And then another case study that we reviewed was the core sensor green tag in 19 female field hockey players, right? Completed 4 separate sessions in artwork environments, 2 hours per session. Um, the body cap temperature pill was used to assess core body temperature, and then again to measure, right, the accuracy or precision of a wearable sensing device. So they disagreed, more than 0.3 degrees Fahrenheit for 41 to 60% of all data. Again, these are devices, some of them are more effective than the other, but so far, I mean, with our experience using our slate safety band V2, that has, produced very good results, very reliable results. So, wearable sensing devices are good, but there are still barriers, associated with the use of the wearable devices, right? As you can see, there was a study conducted in 2018, right? Privacy concern is still number one, right? Core body temperature, heart rate have been tracked. So how do we ensure that these data being collected, the information, they are secure and they're not used negatively, all right, to impact the workers, right? Employee compliance is another thing. Durability of the sensor, accuracy, as discussed previously, there are still things that we need to be mindful of, cost, and so on and so forth. So it's very, very important for us to, look at, privacy and security, right, which is a major concern, right? And for us to really get workers buying, we have to make sure that the data or information being collected are kind of secure, right, to be able to protect their privacy. And when it comes to the factors that can actually help, right, or that can impact the implementation of wearable devices, for heat stress prevention, we did a study, to look at, some of the main factors that can impact the implementation, the adoption and implementation of, cutting-edge technologies like wearable sensing devices for heat stress prevention, availability of staff that have the knowledge, on how it's used, training of the employee on how to use the devices. I mean, some of these devices are kind of intuitive, right? They are easy to use most times. And then availability of the results, effectiveness, right? The accuracy, precision, how effective are these devices? I mean, these are things that can impact the implementation of the devices and how useful they are. They actually able to help provide, the information we want them to provide. And then, of course, what are the standards in terms of privacy regulations, security regulations that can guide the use. And some of the strategies that can, be used is to educate workers, right, on the importance of on how well these devices can help, in terms of continuous automated monitoring, that of course are better than the traditional methods, and then personalization of the information, personal alerts that helps personal alerts that help the worker to take, proactive action to protect themselves is very, very important. And then, of course, there's need for us to continually assess, increase the accuracy of these devices, test them to be sure that they're working before you start using them. Because by the time you start implementing, there's tendency for workers to rely on them, right? So you want to make sure that yes, they're actually performing, well. Performance assessment is very, very critical, right? And concluding remarks. So workers in industrial sectors, I mean, we have construction, manufacturing, athletics, high risk industrial sectors. They are more likely, to die if nothing is taken, right? If no action is taken, right? They're more likely to die from heat stress related illnesses. So it's very, very important for us to be able to understand the risk factors, right? And so we can protect the workers. And the trend is kind of increasing when it comes to what we're seeing in terms of the climatic condition, right? It's not looking as if is going to be getting cooler, right? Every year we're seeing heightened, temperature, record high temperature. So again, we need to really up our game when it comes to, preventing heat-related illnesses, right? Again, prevention is the word, right? There are personal metrics, physiological monitoring, environmental monitoring, and monitoring of work-related conditions or factors, that we can't continue to do traditionally, right? We have to be on top of it by leveraging some of these cutting-edge technologies that can automatically and continuously monitor them and provide, real-time alerts, real-time information that workers can use to, protect themselves, from heat-related illnesses. And then again, these technologies obviously could play a critical role, and we should take closer look into them and use them, to advantage to prevent age-related illnesses in our work environments. And that's the presentation. And then I believe we've covered, the learning objectives. So this is just a recap of the learning objectives. At least we've discussed the risk factors of age-related illnesses in industrial work environments. And we understand age-related illnesses, associated causes, as well as the preventive measures that we can take. And then we've been able to describe the strategies that can be used to reduce and prevent, age-related illnesses, leveraging physiological monitoring for the prevention. And that's the presentation today. Thank you all for listening.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much again. Appreciate all of that detail here. We'll go ahead and I'll drop the instructions in the chat and then share a screen here. But before we do that, I just wanted to open up for questions. Anything anyone wanted to bring up, any advice that you all are looking for, we'll open it up for a couple minutes. I think I'll ask just one question selfishly. For those of us that are in AT education, what's one thing that you hope that from the information that you have here or outside that you hope that students are learning about this topic?
So wow, that's a great question. So I would say, again, just like I've said, proactive safety is something that is very, very critical, right? You don't want to wait until, we have problems, right? You want to be proactive. And one way, to be proactive is, to make sure you have the right information. So for instance, this training we're having is very critical. Whenever we have the opportunity, you know to be part of a training that gives you this information, it's very, very critical, right? If you know how to identify hazard, then you can prevent it, right? So I would say being proactive in our approach, the first, training, and then being open-minded when it comes to, leveraging the emerging technologies that we have, right? And I believe these technologies can also help inform training as well, right? Because they have plethora of data that we can actually collect, right? That we can analyze, to inform, the decision we make. So it's very important for us to be mindful of how, in fact, we can leverage technology, to kind of inform the training, right, that we make available, to our workers. For instance, personal, training, personalized training, very, very critical. I mean, yesterday's speaker talked about, the different apps that have been developed, right? So the apps could also be, used, as forms of training. So it's very important for us to, be mindful of all these factors. Again, just to recap, having that proactive mindset, okay, having that understanding of what the risk factors are, what the preventive measures are, with respect to, having the training and leveraging technology to have those information at your fingertips.
Yeah, thank you. Questions here? Looks like we got a hand raised. Go ahead.
Hello, my name's Stefan. I'm an industrial athletic trainer with a utility company. And I wanted to ask, my question is if we ever have like a coworker or employee that suffers from a more severe heat illness, like heat exhaustion or heat syncope or, God forbid, heat stroke, but if someone experiences a more severe heat illness, are there any recommendations you have when that employee returns to work? Like, should we monitor them? What should we look for? If we check in on them, like what are things that, like, any helpful guidance or advice we should give them as they're like returning to work after a heat illness episode?
Yes, that's a great question. That's a great question. So again, just like I mentioned, right? So you want to check what the worker can take, right? I mean, a worker that has a pre-existing condition, right? Of course, you want to make sure you're very careful, right? How you kind of engage them, right? So what you want to do is to make sure you're constantly monitoring, and again, that brings to the conversation the importance of leveraging some of these active, technology devices that can help give you real-time information, right? And then the other thing is you want to make sure that you understand what the worker can take, right? When we talk about the body physiology, our body, they respond in different ways. For instance, a heart rate that is high, my heart rate, could be, mine heart rate could be different for different people, right? So, I mean, we talked about the fact that when it goes beyond 110, right, you have to, implement, a work rest schedule, right? For some people, their heart rates, when it's high, they still feel normal. Why some? When it's low, so again, you want to understand that particular worker. So what is the stress load for that worker? You want to make sure you're mindful of the kind of work you expose the workers to, the kind of physically exacting work you expose the worker to, the kind of environment you expose the worker to. So that's how you kind of get the worker back. Again, understanding the physiology of the worker, how the worker responds is going to really help. So constant monitoring, right? And then being mindful or having that understanding, pre-medical screening is very critical, for instance, for all workers. So you want to know what is that, personal threshold, when it comes to your heart rates, what you can take, right? It may be different, when you move from one worker to the other. So that's going to be my suggestion, constant monitoring, leveraging all the devices and then knowing, what's the range of that particular athlete, for instance. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that.
This concludes the IETS On Demand Continuing Education Program video. To claim your CU, You must be a member of the Industrial Athletic Trainers Society and complete the form Claim Your CU found in the YouTube description. If you have any interest in learning more about what the Education Committee has to offer, reach out to the email address on your screen. If you would like to volunteer your time to speak on a topic that interests you, please reach out. Thank you and stay safe.